The story begins with an old monk speaking to a visitor. The monk, known as the living Buddha, Master Mu-san, was responding to a question. The man in front of him had said he wished to know more about Wi Yeonho. Mu-san replied calmly. Wi Yeonho, the radiant martial sovereign, he was a very benevolent and upright man. Surely, the Buddha must have sent him down to us. The visitor nodded, as if expecting that response. He explained that he was compiling materials to document Yeonho's history. Hearing this, Musan's expression suddenly shifted. His calm demeanor was replaced by visible tension, and his hands began to tremble. The visitor, startled by the abrupt change in Musan's face, had merely asked what Yeonho was like in everyday life. The scene then shifted to the Hubei Peng clan. The same man was being thrown out of the clan's premises. A furious voice echoed. Why Yeonho this? Why Yeonho that? He is the supreme elder of the Hubei Peng clan. It was Peng Dojuk who was shouting, glaring at the historian. He added, why the hell did a wretched, trashy human like you come here? Then, ordering his servants, Dojuk commanded, bring a whole bag of salt and scatter it around here. The man stood shocked as servants threw salt on him. It became clear that Wi Yeonho's name stirred intense emotions among clan leaders and masters, though the world revered Yeonho as the radiant martial sovereign, a legendary figure who ended an era of chaos and stood as a paragon of virtue, heroism, and martial brilliance. Those who had actually known him responded with fear, disdain, or fury. Some called him the greatest of all time, others the most renowned chivalrous warrior to have ever lived. As the historian ran away from the Peng clan grounds, he thought to himself, why does everyone avoid speaking of him? As a historian, he felt it was his duty to document even the hidden, inconvenient sides of history. He believed that perhaps today he would finally uncover the reason why. Soon, the scene changed to the beggar sect, where the historian met a cheerful old man known as the Divine Mad Dog. With a jovial grin, the man said, so, you were chased away from Shaolin and the Hubei Peng clan. The historian replied, yes, and their responses were all the same wherever I went. The moment I mentioned Wi Yeonho's name, Mad Dog laughed and interrupted. Of course they reacted like that, surprised. The historian listened closely as Mad Dog began recounting Yeonho's story. 100 years ago, in the Guangdong clan, there lived a boy who, despite his noble martial lineage, was considered the absolute worst kind of person. At the age of 12, Wi Yeonho lay on his bed, drowsy and mumbling to himself, I want to become the strongest. This boy had dreamed of becoming the greatest under the heavens. Raised within a martial clan, he had grown up hearing about warrior chivalry. He knew that the surest path to greatness was relentless effort. He believed that no matter how talented someone was, nothing came without hard work. However, for Yeonho, there was a small problem. He always began his path tomorrow. As the sun began to set, Yeonho remained sprawled in bed. Seeing the light fade, he told himself, what a shame. Today was supposed to be the day I laid the foundations to become the best. With a sleepy smile, he added, well, I'll sleep soundly tonight and train tomorrow. Just then, someone entered his room and approached his bed. It was his father, Wi Yeonho, the patriarch of Guangdong's Wi clan and a man honored with the title of righteous chivalrous swordsman. Looking at his son, Yeonho asked with disbelief, do you know what time it is? Yeonho looked up lazily and replied, I saw the sun, his father growled. And yet, you're still lying on your bed, Yeonho explained, because the sun is still going down. Visibly irritated, Yeonho snapped, do you even know how long you've been holed up in this room? Yeonho tried to guess. 2 days, maybe 3. No, I think it's 2, Yeonho shouted. It's been 4 days. For damn days you've been rolling around wrapped in that blanket. You useless brat. Doesn't your back hurt? Even a bear would flip over from sweat after 3 days. Yeonho grinned and replied, that's why I get up every now and then. His father fumed. Yeonho added, I actually try to train, but every time I open my eyes, the sun had already set, and when the sun sets, you have to sleep. That way you can get up early the next day to train. Yeonho, reaching his breaking point, flipped Yeonho's entire bed, sending his son tumbling to the floor. I'm finally going to fix that rotten attitude of yours today, he yelled. Meanwhile, at the Guangdong clan's office, Yeonho sat on a chair, rubbing his temple in frustration. Before him stood Joe Bang, the clan's administrator. Bang asked, "Is this about the second young master again?" Jonghan sighed. "Who else would I be worried about?" Bang tried to reassure him. "Don't worry, sir. He'll mature soon enough." Jonghan, closing his eyes, muttered, "It's all my fault." Years ago, when Yeonho was just 2, Jonghan had left on a martial dual pilgrimage. He had expected to return in 2 years, but a series of incidents extended his journey to 8 long years. Though he had returned as an acclaimed warrior, what he lost was immeasurable. When he came back, his once gentle wife, Han Senga, had become fiercer than a tiger. His beloved second son had become a lazy sloth. Bang encouraged him. "There must still be a way," Jonghan asked. "What way?" Bang replied with a grin. "Have you forgotten? He'll be returning soon." Jonghan remembered. His firstborn son. Bang nodded. "Yes, after 3 years, he's finally back from the academy." Jonghan's expression brightened. "Yes. Why Sanho? That little brat." Yeonho fears only one person. Back in Yeonho's room, a figure silently approached from behind. Yeonho shivered. "Why am I suddenly getting chills?" he wondered. He turned and saw him. Sanho, his elder brother, with a trembling voice. Yeonho greeted him. "Brother." Sanho narrowed his eyes. "How long have you been asleep?" Avoiding the question, Yeonho asked, "When did you get here?" Sanho repeated, more sternly. "I asked you first." Panicking, Yeonho said, "No, it's not what you think. I trained early this morning, really hard. I just took a nap afterward. It's true." Internally, he cursed. "Damn it. When did he get back?" Sanho raised a finger and pointed toward a nearby candle. "Then use a technique to split that candle in two. Let's see how much you've improved in 3 years." Yeonho grabbed his sword and positioned himself in front of the candle. Sanho, unimpressed by the hesitation, barked, "What are you waiting for? Go ahead." Yeonho hesitated. "I mean, we're indoors. It could be dangerous." Sanho cut him off. "I'll take care of that. Just show me what you've got." Yeonho nodded, closed his eyes, and muttered, "Here goes nothing." He charged forward, using the soaring dragon technique, and passed the candle. Turning around, he looked, only to find the candle completely untouched. Sanho's voice turned cold. 3 years have passed. That's more than enough time to master a sword technique and move on to the next level. But you've gotten worse than you were 3 years ago." He walked out, leaving Yeonho speechless. Later that night, during dinner with the whole family, Yeonho sat quietly, worried. "I'm going to get indigestion," he thought. "I'm sure of it." Jonghan asked Sanho, "How's life at the martial academy?" Sanho replied, "It's fine." "Any difficulties?" Jonghan asked again. Sanho responded, "If there were no hardships, it wouldn't be training. I believe they're essential to overcoming oneself." Jonghan nodded in pride. "You've suffered a lot in my absence," Sanho smiled. "You had it harder, father, being away for so long." Then, Jonghan asked, "Are there any other issues?" Sanho set his chopsticks down. "There is one." Sanga leaned forward. "What is it?" Sanho answered. "It's about Yeonho." Both parents looked surprised. Yeonho froze in his seat. "What about me?" he thought nervously. Sanho continued, "I think we need to bring Yeonho to my martial academy." Yeonho's face went pale, back. With Mad Dog, he concluded the tale to the historian. Even Master Musan and Peng Dojuk grit their teeth at the mere mention of Yeonho's name. That was when the great history began. Back then, no one could have imagined that this lazy boy would one day shake the entire world. Just like that, Yeonho was half forced to go to the martial academy. His family was a bit upset. His younger sister Surian cried as she begged him not to go. Jonghan, however, smiled brightly and told Yeonho to come back as a man. Their mother simply told him to take care of himself. Though no one tried to stop him, Yeonho reassured Surian not to cry, promising that he would return. With that, Yeonho and Sanho began their journey to the academy. Jonghan stood behind laughing as he watched Yeonho leave. The journey was smooth, at least for Sanho. Yeonho, lying exhausted on his horse, asked if they were almost there. Sanho replied that there were still 10 more days to go. Hearing this, Yeonho was shocked and started yelling at him. Sanho explained that they would have arrived in 5 days if Yeonho knew how to ride a horse. Yeonho shouted back that he had never ridden one before. Sanho calmly said he wasn't blaming him, just answering his question. Soon Yeonho asked Sanho to rest, complaining, about how steep the hill was and how tired he felt his back and but felt like they were going to burst. He pointed to a tree nearby and noted that others seemed to be resting there as well. Sanho noticed something off and dismounted his horse to check it out. Yeonho, confused, asked where he was going. Sanho, looking down grimly, said they were too late. The people Yeonho had seen were corpses. Shocked, Yeonho shouted in disbelief. Sanho pointed to a pattern on the bodies and explained that it was caused by a technique known as the flower-indulging palm. It was once called the crimson flower palm, but after a rapist named Seo Jwak used it to commit atrocities, the name changed. Yeonho asked, alarmed, if that meant Seo Jwak was nearby. Sanho, now deadly serious, explained that Seo Jwak often targeted women climbing the mountains and that these bodies meant he had ambushed a group while pursuing a woman. That meant a woman was in danger nearby. Without hesitation, Sanho took off, telling Yeonho to stay put. Yeonho, left behind and surrounded by corpses, grew frustrated and shouted, asking if he was really expected to stay there alone. But Sanho was already gone. Silence fell. Yeonho looked around nervously and muttered to himself that he was screwed. Time passed, and dark clouds gathered overhead. Sanho still hadn't returned. Yeonho shouted in frustration, wondering why he was taking so long. He thought bitterly that Sanho should have just brought him along. He began to worry there was no reason for Sanho to be this late unless something had happened. As the cold weather set in, Yeonho started sneezing. He decided to take the horses and do something, anything, rather than just loiter around and risk becoming tiger food. Suddenly it started to rain. Soaked and miserable, Yeonho cursed his situation and struggled to push the horses forward. He wondered how things had come to this. As he led the horses uphill, he dragged the dead bodies onto them, deciding he couldn't leave them to become tiger feed. He couldn't bury them either because of the rain. Frustrated and exhausted, Yeonho kept pushing, thinking he needed to find shelter. One of the horses suddenly stopped moving. Yeonho shouted at it to obey. At that moment, lightning struck near him, and he fell rolling down the cliff. When he landed, his back hurt, but he spotted something, a cave. Overjoyed, he shouted that he had found shelter from the rain. The horses had followed him down and found their way into the cave as well. He tied them to a nearby stone, looked at his soaked clothes, and muttered that this was why he preferred staying home. He left a mark outside the cave, hoping Sanho would find him, then decided to rest. Though he was worried about his brother, he tried to reassure himself that Sanho was strong and would return. With that, he went to sleep. Sometime later, while Yeonho was sleeping, the rope tied to the stone loosened, and the horses wandered off. A strange blue aura began to surround Yeonho, pulling him beyond a wall deeper into the cave. When he woke up, he was confused. The surroundings still looked like the same cave. He wondered if he had somehow rolled deeper inside. A strange aura filled the space. Then he heard a voice in his mind calling him a fated human. Terrified, Yeonho fell to the ground. As he opened his eyes, he saw a glowing object radiating energy. The glowing presence welcomed him to the fated place and addressed him as the successor of the Radiant Sword. Shocked, Yeonho asked himself if this sparkling thing was the source of the voice. The voice confirmed it, explaining that it had transcended the physical realm and now existed beyond time and space. It urged Yeonho to accept its will and rule over the world. Yeonho, frightened, shouted internally, thinking it was a ghost. The voice reassured him that it was already dead, that only its will remained. It explained that it had prepared this place for someone like Yeonho and asked him to accept its legacy. Yeonho thought the situation felt strangely familiar, a remote cave, a mysterious old man's will. Internally, he laughed, thinking this might be his lucky break. Perhaps he wouldn't even need to train at the martial academy if he could become powerful here. Maybe the heavens were rewarding him for his good heart. The voice told Yeonho there was no time to waste. It asked him to inherit the sword and restore justice to the world. It promised to teach him the Radiant Sword and advised him to train endlessly. Yeonho nodded in agreement. Then came the catch. The voice said that with 30 years of training, Yeonho should be able to replicate the technique. Yeonho's expression changed immediately. 30 years. The voice responded as if proudly that yes, just 30 years. Yeonho, now smiling awkwardly, politely declined. He said he didn't think this destiny was for him and asked the voice to look for someone else, and began backing away. The voice was stunned. It asked in disbelief what Yeonho was doing. Yeonho explained calmly that he would rather give up than stay there for 30 years. Back in the present, a man known as Mad Dog told a historian that this was how the so-called loser Yeonho came to be so strong. Yeonho told the old man with a bright smile that he didn't believe in fate and suggested he find someone else. He apologized politely, then immediately ran away. Suddenly, the old man shouted, "Wait," and from the sparkling portal a figure emerged. It was Baek Muon. Yeonho turned his head, looked back, and remarked that he had been right. This was clearly a scam. Hearing Yeonho call Muhan a scammer, Muhan grew enraged and demanded to know how he dared to say such a thing. Yeonho replied that Muhan had pretended to be one thing, and when that didn't work, he revealed his true self. With a distressed expression, Muhan explained that he hadn't been pretending, he truly was a spirit who had left his body. Yeonho repeated his words, asking a spirit who has left his body. Then he attempted to punch Muhan in the face, but since Muhan was just a spirit projection, Yeonho fell back onto the ground. Muhan asked what he was doing, while Yeonho, now frightened, began to scream, claiming Muhan was a real ghost. Muhan clarified that it was the spirit transmission arts, an advanced technique only top-level martial artists could use, but Yeonho dismissed it, saying that they simply called such beings ghosts. Muhan shouted again, insisting he was not one. By the present time, night had fallen. Mad Dog and the historian sat near a campfire, tightening the flames. Mad Dog began recounting the story of how Yeonho had met his master. The historian questioned him, repeating, "Spirit transmission arts does something like that really exist?" Mad Dog confirmed it, explaining that it was a technique only the most elite martial artists could attain. The historian then asked, "Then who's one martial artist who can use that ability?" With an intense expression, Mad Dog asked him in return, "Do you know the Sword Emperor?" The historian replied that of course he did. He was the strongest person in history. He then added that Baek Muhan, the greatest member of the Thousand Swords Baek clan, would be remembered forever in martial arts history. Mad Dog smiled slightly and confirmed it. He explained that Baek Muhan, the Radiant Sword, was the man later known as the Sword Emperor, and he was the master of the Radiant Martial Sovereign. The historian was shocked. Really? But didn't he live 300 years ago? Mad Dog affirmed it. Yes, from a forgotten generation, but it's true. He made Yeonho. The historian was in awe. He asked if the Radiant Martial Sovereign had immediately requested to become Muhan's disciple. Mad Dog, smirking, clarified that it was the opposite. Muhan, seeing that none of his descendants had come looking for him in 300 years, was desperate for a disciple. At that moment, Muhan had strongly declared to Yeonho that he must become his disciple. But Yeonho, with a sleepy expression, simply asked why he was throwing a tantrum and told him he couldn't learn from him. He was leaving. Muhan, now furious and radiating a powerful aura from his hand, shouted that he wouldn't let Yeonho go so easily. He sealed the exit of the cave with a heavy stone gate. Yeonho stood silently. Muhan laughed and asked what he thought of it. It was a massive stone gate, and with Yeonho's current strength, he'd never be able to lift or break it. Coming closer, Muhan explained that if Yeonho learned his martial arts, he'd be able to cut through it like paper. Yeonho, now serious, responded that there was no helping it. He pulled something from his pocket, turned his head, and began digging a hole in the stone. With his sword, Muhan asked what he was doing. Yeonho replied that he was digging a hole. He explained that no matter how strong it was still just stone, and if he ground it down with metal, it would eventually break. He estimated he'd break through in about a year or two. With an irritated expression, Muhan asked, "You'll do that for a year or two?" Yeonho found that funny, especially coming from someone who had spoken of training him for 30 years. Muhan grew more frustrated and thought to himself that Yeonho was a madman. He couldn't even beat him to death. Coming closer, Muhan told him to just try learning, promising not to disappoint him. Yeonho, still digging, said he didn't like him. Seeing that Yeonho wasn't budging, Muhan reduced the training time to 20 years. Still, Yeonho refused, saying that was too long and that he might consider it if it were 3 years. Muhan, now strained, asked if Yeonho was seriously expecting to learn his martial arts in 3 years. Even Zhang Sanfeng wouldn't be able to do that. But Yeonho, dissatisfied, replied that they simply weren't meant to be. Finally, Muhan relented. He offered 5 years and vowed to do whatever it took to make Yeonho the strongest in the world. Yeonho turned his head, thinking over the offer. The strongest martial artist in the world in 5 years, he repeated internally. He observed Muhan and thought to himself that he had never heard of a spirit as vivid as him. Maybe the technique wasn't spread by word of mouth. Maybe he was telling the half-truth. If that were the case, then Muhan really might have been the strongest master in the world. Smirking, Yeonho decided to take the opportunity and become a master. He drove his sword into the ground, and accepted Muon's offer. Back at the campfire, Mad Dog continued. Yeonho hadn't known at the time that Muon was the Sword Emperor, but it was unfortunate for the Sword Emperor too, because the person he met at the end of his life just happened to be Yeonho. Muon shouted at Yeonho to wake up. Yeonho, annoyed, looked at him and muttered that he was tired. Don't you sleep? Oh right, you're dead. He added that he was human and humans need sleep. Muhan cursed the skies, apologized, and told him they needed to train. After all, the disciple he had received at the end of his life turned out to be a lazy bastard. Yeonho slept all day and practiced each move just once. If he stayed quiet, it might have been bearable, but he always said something that made Muhan explode. If he'd had a body, he would have collapsed from chi deviation caused by the sheer frustration. Muhan thought bitterly of his desire for worldly success, his dream of passing down martial arts, and how he had left his spirit behind in this miserable form. If I had a body, he thought, I'd beat him up and then teach him. As he worried, Yeonho laughed and rolled on the ground. Then getting up, he asked Muhan how he had dropped the stone gate earlier. Muhan, surprised, asked what he meant. Yeonho pointed at the gate and asked if Muhan could use that same power to manipulate his body and teach him martial arts. Muhan explained that he had pulled a string on a device he had already built in advance. Yeonho, skeptical, asked how, considering he didn't even have a body. Muhan clarified that it was unrelated to the body, he had simply used psychic levitation to tug the string with chi. Then a thought struck Muhan. He began laughing maniacally. Yeonho, confused, asked what was wrong with him and if he'd finally gone mad. But Muhan, smiling cunningly, said that he had been too fixated on not having a body. Maybe there were incomplete parts of him since he had been maintaining this spirit for 300 years. But now, thanks to Yeonho, he had learned something useful. Yeonho asked what he was mumbling about, but before he could finish, a stone slammed into the wall beside him. Muhan, grinning, thanked him. He used his aura to lift a stone and explained that even without a body, he could still move rocks at will. Yeonho was both surprised and terrified. Muhan continued lifting more rocks, demonstrating his power. Seeing this, Yeonho pleaded for him to talk first, but Muhan hurled the stones near him, ignoring his protests. From that day forward, Muhan and Yeonho trained day and night. Yeonho learned swordsmanship during the day, and at night they debated fiercely. Whenever Yeonho slept, he trained using the unparalleled dream mythic arts Muhan had taught him. His life became the sword. He lived the sword. There was no time to be lazy, and just like that, 5 years passed in a flash. When Yeonho returned, he shook the world. One day ago, Yeonho was in a deep sleep when Muhan called out to him. Still drowsy, Yeonho murmured for a little more time. Asking to sleep just a bit longer, Muhan called his name again, louder this time. Jolted awake, Yeonho sat up and, still half asleep, told him that he had only wanted a little more sleep. Then, with a suspicious look, he asked if Muhan didn't believe him. Muhan, sitting across from him, gestured for Yeonho to come closer. Yeonho sat down in front of him and asked, "What's going on?" Muhan gave a calm smile and began to speak. He said that he had devoted his entire life to learning martial arts, hoping to reach its end. In pursuit of that goal, he had cared about nothing else. But now, at the end of that long path, he had become an irritable old man, distant from his own clan. Yeonho listened, growing uneasy. Something about Muhan's tone felt very unlike him. Muhan continued. He explained that in hindsight, it was no surprise his clan had abandoned him. After all, he had abandoned them first, his family and his children, all for martial arts. He had once believed that reaching the end of martial arts would grant him everything he needed, but he realized now that martial arts, being a human endeavor, was meaningless if not walked alongside others. He looked at Yeonho and told him that it was Yeonho who helped him understand that. Yeonho was taken aback. Muhan said that Yeonho had been the first person he had ever taught. At first it had made him angry and annoyed, but over time he felt joy, pride, and even a sense of fondness. Concerned, Yeonho asked him what was going on. "Master," he said, "you're acting like we'll never see each other again." Muhan closed his eyes and replied quietly, "Yes, it's time." Startled, Yeonho shouted, "What are you talking about? What do you mean it's time? Do you think I'll fall for that?" He reminded Muhan that they had agreed to train together for 30 years, and only 5 had passed. "You still have to exist for 25 more, he protested. Muhan nodded. "I did say that," he admitted. "So what?" Yeonho pressed. Muhan explained that the internal chi he had transferred to Yeonho in the form of an elixir allowed him to live without food during their training. But maintaining it was not as simple as it seemed. He confessed he had no more power left. It was time for him to say goodbye. Hearing this, Yeonho was shaken. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "If I had known, I would have left to find food and come back to continue training." Muhan, now sweating and with his eyes closed, thought to himself that had Yeonho left the cave, he would surely have returned. He then told Yeonho that he understood how he felt and stood up, saying that he had truly enjoyed the time they had shared, though he had wanted to travel the world and see it alongside Yeonho. This was fine too. Looking at Yeonho, he thought to himself that in his eyes, he could already see Yeonho crisscrossing the world. Then he told him, "Go see the world. Keep it within you. If you do, everything else will follow naturally. But first, see people before you see the world." Yeonho glared at him silently. Muhan looked up and reflected that he had spent so much time looking at the sky, he had failed to see what was right at his feet. He warned Yeonho not to make the same mistake. "Even if I can't see you again, even if no one remembers my existence," he thought, "I live on through your movements, your swordsmanship." As Muhan's spirit began to fade, he gave Yeonho one final message. "Even if you're not outstanding or great, that's fine." Yeonho panicked and shouted, "Master, you can't leave already. There's still so much I haven't learned." "No, it's okay even if I don't learn everything. Just stay a bit longer, just one more day." But Muhan's fading voice replied, "Just be happy." And his spirit vanished. Yeonho broke down crying. "You could have told me just a little earlier," he sobbed. Sometime later, in the present, Yeonho emerged from the cave, his face twisted in anguish. "So this is why he didn't tell me anything in advance," he muttered, clutching his shirt. He noticed something written on it. His expression turned manic. When did he write all this? That damned old man. He couldn't just leave quietly. Could he? Before disappearing, Muhan had written a message on Yeonho's clothes. In summary, it said that although Yeonho had learned martial arts rapidly in 5 years, it was still incomplete, knowing Yeonho wouldn't continue training if he disappeared. Muhan had infused a feature into his body. The inner elixir Yeonho swallowed would cause his martial arts to grow, but not automatically. If Yeonho's actual progress in martial arts fell behind the rate of the elixir's enhancement, his inner energy would collapse and he would die. Muhan's message summarized it simply: "You'll die if you're lazy in training, brat." Yeonho, now frustrated, yelled. That damned old man was up to no good. But Muhan had also told him to travel the world, to see and feel different things, and to grow from those experiences. Don't be content with staying in a small place. Muhan had advised, see big things, become a big person. Calming down, Yeonho looked at the note and said, "Damned master." Then he read the final instruction. "The first place you must go to is Reincarnation. Find the world's greatest scholar and stay with him." Yeonho's face turned tired and worn. "How many places is he going to send me?" he muttered, stretching out his legs. He looked toward the horizon. "I was going to go home, but I'll return after I've done what I need to do. Don't worry too much, mother and father." Closing his eyes, he whispered, "I have to do what I must." He gathered his belongings, took one last look at the cave and muttered, "I won't be back, so just don't bother me anymore." Then he left. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the cave. It was Muhan's spirit, laughing brightly. Watching Yeonho go, he chuckled, "You bastard, if you don't learn about the world, you'll dry up like a mummy and die. What kind of martial arts exists in the world like that?" He smiled and continued, "I can't let you live in the middle of nowhere. The world is too big for that, and your martial arts too precious." With a final gentle smile, his spirit faded into the air. "I was happy thanks to you," he said inwardly. "Be happy." Time passed, and Yeonho arrived at Kaifeng. Looking utterly exhausted from his journey, spotting a man sitting nearby, he asked, "Is this Kaifeng?" The man was Jang Il, later known as the Divine Mad Dog. Seeing Yeonho's worn appearance, he thought, "Who is this mummy?" He replied, "Yeah, it's Kaifeng." Yeonho explained that he had come because he had something to ask. Jang Il interrupted, "Money. I need to pay?" Yeonho asked. "Of course," Jang Il said. "Nothing's free in this world." Looking closer at him, he thought, "He sounds barely 20, but his face looks 50. I've seen beggars, but never one this pathetic." He told Yeonho, "I want to help you for free since we're in the same field. But rules are rules." "Same field?" Yeonho asked. "Yeah, we're both beggars. How do I look like a beggar?" "You obviously are," Jang Il said bluntly. "If you don't have money, I can't help you. Go beg and come back." Yeonho replied, I'm not a beggar. Why would I beg? Pointing at him, Jang Il said, it's not that beggars beg. It's that once you beg, you're a beggar. Then he suddenly grabbed Yeonho's hands. Hey, you want to work with me? That night in Jang Il's room, a pile of coins placed in front of Yeonho, Jang Il stared in shock. You earned half a year's worth of this branch's expenses in half a day. You're the god of wealth. Two men outside the building heard the shouting. One asked the other, what's going on? Other replied, apparently a really pathetic beggar showed up. Inside, while eating, Jang Il asked Yeonho what he wanted to know. Yeonho, eating too, listed the locations, hobbies, and specialties of famous scholars. That's easy, Jang Il said. Yeonho continued, now do blacksmiths. That too. As Yeonho kept going, Jang Il looked stunned. All of that? I did promise, Jang Il said finally. Come back in 7 days. Yeonho lay down and said, I have nowhere to go, nothing to do. I'll just stay here, Jang Il agreed. A few days later, he came to regret it. One morning, a panicked man rushed in. Branch leader, we've got trouble. What kind of trouble could beggars have? Jang Il asked. The beggar sect. We're going to starve to death. Elsewhere, 2 beggars were being yelled at for pretending to be poor. One man in the crowd pointed and said, if you're going to be beggars, at least reach his level. Everyone turned to see Yeonho sitting in silence as coins piled up before him. Moved by his appearance, people couldn't stop giving. Jang Il stared in horror. He's taking over the beggar world completely.